So the question is, how much of what you see is what you actually are seeing? How much of what's going on in the world is actually getting into your head? Now, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we did a training on the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind. And if you haven't seen it yet, then you want to go back and you want to watch that. But here's the thing about the conscious and unconscious mind. There are many more, there's a lot more stimulus, there's a lot more things going on than our visual conscious spectrum is able to process, right? If you guys remember that, right? So our subconscious mind is able to process, you know, if our regular mind is dealing with one movie at a time and maybe a couple of thoughts here and there, then your subconscious mind is kind of processing through thousands of movies at every single moment, right? So what we see isn't necessarily everything that's going on. And that reflects in how we do our work. It reflects in how we do our marketing. It reflects in our relationships, a number of these elements. So I'm about to show you guys a video. If you've seen this, stay quiet. If you haven't, then pay attention. All right. So here we go.
An awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? No. The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear? No!
How many of you guys saw that? Did you see it the first time? I saw that yesterday, and I'm watching it, and I'm counting, and I think I didn't even get to 13 correct. I think I had
I'd seen it before.
Yeah, once you've seen it, guys, you'll never be able to unsee it, right? I mean, you've seen it now. Every time you look at it again, you'll notice it right away. But that's what happens with our perception, right? We have a bit of a bias in all sorts of different things. We pay attention to what we feel we're supposed to pay attention to, and we ignore so many other things. I mean, once you recognize what was there, once you said, hey, but did you see this dancing bear? And you saw it. Did everybody feel the same thing like I did of how in the hell did I not see that the first time? Because it was so absolutely ridiculous. And yet that's what we deal with on a daily basis. That's what you deal with in your relationships. That's what you deal with every time you meet somebody. And a lot of you are doing it with your marketing. You're putting your own biases onto what you think your audience is wanting. And so there's a disconnect there. Can't tell you how many times people go, well, I wouldn't do that. I go, that's great. You aren't your audience, right? We're in your relationships. And if a relationship is strained, it's because we're assuming that other people are going to think or feel like we do. And we're facing in the last year and a half, especially, but if we look at kind of the last 5 years, there's been an incredible amount of miscommunication, and most of it based on these biases that we bring into situations, right? April saying we pay attention to the negative, we don't see the good. Yeah, absolutely. And it allows us, or it forces us to miss opportunities. So here's a handful of different types of biases that I want you guys to pay attention to. So, and you can look some of these up if one of these kind of stands out to you, but do me a favor as I talk about these, don't simply think about that individual in your life that you feel is maybe a little bit biased in one way or another, whether it be through bigotry or racism or financial advice, or, you know, how they look at you and your business, whatever. I want you to look at yourself. Think about you and what you're dealing with and the struggles in communication that you have, or how you feel other people perceive you. So number one is the confirmation bias. This is that when people look at you, they see what they're expecting to see, that you see what you're expecting to see. They hear what they're expecting to hear. They seek and will find evidence that matches their expectations. Now, what's going on politically, what's going on financially, what's going on oftentimes in your relationships is a tremendous amount of confirmation bias. It's that person in your life that always tells you that something's going to go wrong. And guess what? They're going to be right once in a while. And those are the moments when they say, see, I told you so. I told you it wasn't going to happen, right? Because a lot of times you're going to have those negatives happen before the positive. But they're confirming that. Politically, we see that. Next, primary effect. The first impression disproportionately influences how we interpret and remember information. People resist changing opinions once they've formed. This is important in your marketing, guys. It's why you want those images sharp and clear. It's why you want your message to speak to your audience in a clear and concise way to their problems, their pain points, what they're struggling with. This is important. It's also incredibly important in, business situations, everything else. Next, the halo effect. We tend to assume that people who possess one positive quality also have many others. For example, someone that's good looking, we typically look at them, we go, oh, they may be smart and charming, right? If they're kind, they're probably honest. We take one effect and we apply it to all of those things. Stereotypes. Most people are biased, yet they deny it. Unconsciously, we're influenced by stereotypical beliefs about gender, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, professions, socioeconomic classes, education, religion, all sorts of different things, right? We categorize people on a host of dimensions, including your facial features. It's human nature. We cannot turn it off, but we can become conscious of it. So forget about other people. What biases do you have with stereotypes, halo effect, conscious bias? Next one, the false consensus effect. We assume other people think and feel like we do. We erroneously believe our bad habits are universal and normal. We tend to believe that we have better values and are generally more honest, kind, and capable than others. You guys realize that? Most of you believe that you're kinder than other people around you. You believe that you're more honest, more capable. I mean, I believe I'm more honest, capable, and kind than everybody around me, but I mean, that's just, anyway, just kidding. Okay, case in point, it's easy to fool someone that it is to convince them that they've been fooled. Yeah, that's so true. So Michelle, you can look up, if you just look up the, you're asking for the URL, if you just look up an awareness test or the gorilla awareness test, you'll find it, or the bear awareness test. Next, the fundamental attribution error. I thought this was interesting. When we're too quick to label people or their actions, okay, the assumption that what someone does reflects directly who they are. For example, if someone acts badly, we assume they did so because they have bad character, right? You did this, and so you're evil. It's black and white. But if we were in the same situation or we acted in the same way, we did so because it was a tough position, it was a difficult situation, the environment we found ourselves in, all of those things forced us into a situation. Think about that for a second. How many times have we done something, and oftentimes, not necessarily that it's justified, but we can justify it to ourselves, or we can look at it and simply say, well, I did it because this is, so you don't understand the situation that I was in and what I was presented with and what they were saying to me, or you just don't understand the years that built up to that particular decision. So let me explain. But if we see it in someone else immediately, this is our decision. They're a bad individual, right? I bring up these things simply to show there's always, what is the saying? There's her version, there's his version, and then there's the truth in the middle, right? And a lot of times that's where we need to live, is much more in those gray areas in the middle than we allow ourselves to live. We need to be willing to look at more. So if you're struggling, if you have one of these biases that's much stronger, one thing that you can do is, instead of the confirmation bias and seeking for confirmation for what you already believe, every once in a while, try and prove yourself wrong. Don't do it though through opinions. And this is where one of the key skills that I talk about people with on the strategy calls, one of the very first skills I say, hey, you need to learn this is what? Research. You've got to be able to find the right information, real information. And you've got to be able to understand that, look, CNN, MSNBC, they're biased. Fox News, Newsmax, they're biased. And there's going to be confirmation bias going on with both of those. So if we're talking politically, we need to find real information. If we're looking at the markets, if we're looking at business, one group of people is going to find things that confirm what they're thinking, and another group is going to find things that confirm what they're thinking, and you need to find the information that balances it out. For your audience, as you're getting into marketing, instead of projecting your life and your struggles and everything, that becomes part of your story. It's part of how you connect to your audience, but don't assume that they've gone through the exact same things to get them where they are that you have. With your significant other, it's not their job to get you. It's not their job to understand exactly how you think or what you do or why you do what you do. And we want to be able to do that in a relationship, but that requires a significant amount of conversation and communication that many of us are unwilling to do because it's difficult. But one thing you can do simply is find out what that other person, whether it's your target audience, it's your love, it's your kids, figure out what they love, figure out what they enjoy. Try to understand why they enjoy that and allow them that joy, that love, that freedom in their life. You know, there's a number of projects, there's a number of things that my fiance and I have done throughout the years that, you know, we've just kind of learned. We've got some things that we love together. There are things that she loves that I don't. There are things that I love that she doesn't. She'll shake her head at me. And you know what? That's okay. That's totally okay. Michael saying the key is not to deny our prejudices and biases, but to know how to operate with them. Yep, one needs to disassociate from them, and we can observe dispassionately so everyone benefits. Absolutely. So that's your level of self-awareness. It's not that the biases don't exist. You've got to understand they do. Okay, everybody, listen, you're biased. There's something there. There's certain stereotypes. There's certain things. You're biased against certain elements or in favor of certain elements, and you need to be conscious of them. And as Michael's saying here, understand how to consciously function with them and better yourself in that process so that it's not negatively affecting whatever relationship that you have. At the same time, it doesn't mean I have to put up with a high level of bias with other people, but I don't need to fight them about it. I can simply remove myself from the situation, right? But be more conscious of who you are. Be a little more conscious of the way you look at life. Understand that what's coming in through your eyeballs isn't necessarily what's happening out in the world. You're missing a great big part of it. There's a lot more going on. You know, when that really became obvious to me was when I was down in Brazil. I was 19. I was down there from 19 to 21. I was down there as a missionary. And there was, you know, I'm walking around and everybody's asking me how I'm at the time from Arizona. People are asking me how I put up with the constant earthquakes, right? Well, California has earthquakes, but in Brazil and some of these other countries, all they hear about are those disasters, right? Like, well, I lived in California, but I haven't for a decade. We don't have any earthquakes. You don't? Well, have you met the Backstreet Boys or NSYNC? No, I haven't met the Backstreet Boys. They're not just everywhere, right? All sorts of different things, right? But then there were elements of news stories from the US that were being portrayed down there. But when I messaged, sent letters, we weren't emailing at the time, they were actual letters, mailing back and forth with my parents. And when I came back, there were floods going on. I remember at one point in the south of Brazil, just horrendous floods and landslides and death and destruction. And it was horrific. Nobody here in the States heard anything about it. You'll hear about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. And I'm not trying to get into a political argument there, but you see that, But then we have all of these other elements all around the world that are just ignored. You know, I loved Brazil, but I happened to spend some time in a very violent area of Brazil. It's called the Baixada Fluminense. It's just outside of the main area of Rio. There's a lot of the shanty towns down in Rio are called favelas. And it's areas where on a lot of these hills and sometimes flatter areas, people just kind of build up houses, and they build up houses and houses and houses, and they stack them. And it's, you know, they're grabbing electricity from live wires and getting them in there. And so there's electricity and there's water, but it's not actually set up by the city. But there ends up being hundreds of thousands of people in these favelas, in these areas. And they're not controlled by local governments and police and standard enforcement. It's really run by the chefs, you know, the chiefs in charge of the bosses inside the favelas. Well, while I was there in Rio, this is from 99 to 01, the war was going on in Kosovo in Europe, right? And some of you guys may remember that and how horrific it was, right? And because we heard about it, because the UN was there and there were peacekeeping troops and there was bombings and it was just this horrible thing that was happening. Well, there was a certain period of time during this 3-month period that during that 3 months, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 people killed by bombings in Kosovo during that time. During the same 3-month period while I was in Brazil, somewhere in the neighborhood of 350, 360 people were killed inside the Baixada Fluminense. So more people were assassinated, murdered in this area of Brazil simply by the neighborhoods and what was going on than in a war zone. But have any of you ever heard of it? Have you ever heard of a place called the Baixada? No. We've got a great big world that we live in. And look, it's a horrible example, but I use it because it's extreme. Because as much as things like that are going on in the world, there are amazing things and amazing individuals that are doing phenomenal good in this world. And at some point, many of you are going to step into that. So we can look at those big, beautiful things, but we can also look at what's going on in your lives and recognize that sometimes there's a lot more good than we give credit to. Sometimes there's a lot more love than we give credit to. And if we simply open our eyes up a little bit more, we'll recognize it. Bring more of that into your lives. Work on the confirmation bias, become more self-aware of where you are, work on who you are, and become the best versions of yourselves. So go out today, make that a reality. Study a little bit some of these things, but work on your self-awareness. And in that road, you take yourself to the next level. And as always, rise up from the ashes, fly like the phoenixes that you are. Love you guys. Take care. We will talk soon. Bye-bye.